Well, folks, our good friends at the Gibson Guitar Company have made the news again here this week, and unfortunately, it's not real flattering news. Let's talk about that, shall we? So, a number of viewers have contacted me in the last couple of days and asked me to weigh in on this whole Gibson suing Dean Guitars lawsuit thing. You want my opinion? Here, I'm going to give it to you. And the truth is, I honestly see both sides of it. Let's start with Gibson's Perspective. And keep in mind, this is coming from a guy whose videos on his YouTube channel have been dinged by copyright infringements numerous times over the last couple of months. Some of which I'm still not real happy about. One of them in particular because it was a friggin' kazoo. Anyway, that said, as we, if you've paid attention to YouTube at all in the last 3 or 4 months, you would know that there was a new law passed over in the UK called Article 13. Long story short, without getting into all the logistics, and I'll be honest, I'm not real sure that one of these is related to the other. Copyright laws have been, have had the screws tightened, so to speak. And a lot of people are feeling the effects of it. So, just to fill you in on what I know about this situation. So, the whole saga has begun here just this past week. I believe it was Wednesday that Gibson actually released a marketing video on YouTube, I believe, that was not necessarily a marketing video. It was more of a guitar bullying video. In other words, a video bullying the other smaller guitar manufacturers. Basically what they said was, these are our designs. These are they've always been our designs, and if you are going to continue to use them, we are going to come after you. And the video was not really the most tactful thing in the world, and I'll get to that here in a minute. The following day, Gibson announces that they have indeed filed a lawsuit against Dean Guitars, specifically for their use of the Explorer and Flying V body styles, and also some of their headstocks. So, looking at it from Gibson's perspective, I can see where they would have a case, because let's face it, the bodies of the V and the Dean V, that is, and the Dean Z are absolute direct copies of the Gibson Flying V and the Gibson Explorer. No question. Also in question is what I will refer to as Dean's traditional 3-in-3 headstock design, which looked very similar to what we know today as the traditional Gibson 3-in-3 headstock. Now, the guitars that Dean uses this particular headstock on are some of their more traditional body shapes. This headstock is not used on the Z or the V. However, the Dean V and the Dean Z both use a split V headstock, and my understanding is this particular headstock may also be in question from the Gibson Guitar Company. Now, this one I'm not real sure about because, let's face it, Gibson used it once in 1958 on the Modern, and even then it wasn't quite the same design. They brought it back just a few times for a limited run reissue of the Modern, which hasn't happened all that often. But the very few times they have brought it back on a reissue, limited run, custom shop, something or other of some kind, it's had that headstock. But again, it's not exactly the same split V style headstock that Dean Guitars uses. Although I guess there was that one other time that they used a split V headstock. Yeah, that time. So, getting back on track. Those body shapes, the Dean Z and the Dean V are absolutely dead ringers for the Gibson Explorer and the Gibson Flying V, respectively. Does Gibson have a case? In the instance of copyright infringement, here's my opinion. I think they absolutely do have a case. That said, I think everybody is questioning the motive behind this particular lawsuit. And the reason why is because Dean guitars have been making the Z and the V since the 1970s. Why has it taken Gibson more than 4 decades to finally decide to come after Dean guitars for their copyright infringement of these particular body styles, especially back in the 70s when they were going after everybody? They went after Ibanez, they went after, Tokai, they went after Greco, they went after, everybody was stealing Gibson designs back then, and I don't think they won any of those lawsuits. They won the one against PRS for the single cut, and then my understanding is that one was eventually overturned, and they, in the long run, they ended up losing that one too. But again, in Gibson's defense, despite the time frame, and I do not know, for the record, I do not know if there is a statute of limitations on something like this that that determines if 40 plus years is too long to wait to file a copyright lawsuit on a design. I don't know that. I'm assuming that there is not a statute of limitations. Otherwise, had that time limit passed, I'm assuming that means that Gibson would not have been able to file this lawsuit. So, me looking at it objectively, does Gibson have a case? Yes. And the reason why I say that is because, the bands whose material that I have used in some of my videos, and by material I mean bands whose mute songs or riffs I may have covered to demo a particular piece of gear or whatever the video topic may have been. From looking at that situation objectively, yes, those bands absolutely had a right to file a copyright infringement based on the laws that are written. Now, there are other bands whose riffs I have employed in some of my videos, and you may have noticed recently, by the way, I've tried to stick to all original material just because I'm tired of dealing with it. But there are other bands, who have not, sent a copyright claim on my channel for use of said riffage. A lot of bands from the 90s seem to be pretty cool about it. A lot of the bands from the 70s, not so cool about it. So, now looking at it from the other side of the coin, and in this case, that would be Gibson. I get why those copyright claims have been made against those particular videos. So, from that perspective, again, I do understand why Gibson is making this claim. Looking at it from Dean Guitar's perspective, on the other hand, I can also see why they're upset. And the reason why is because, I think Dean Guitars has always looked upon those models as tributes and inspiration to the classic Gibson models. As so many other companies have. And that's what it's boiling down to. There are, let's face it, there's really 3 iconic guitar companies that have been around for decades, and in cases of 2 of them, centuries. And that is Gibson, Martin, and Fender. Fender being the youngest of the 3. Of those 2, Martin only makes acoustics, so we're going to throw them out of it. So now we're down to Fender and Gibson. And both of those companies have arguably the most iconic electric guitar designs that we have or probably will ever see. The Les Paul, the SG, the Strat, the Tele, and I'm leaving many out. We get the idea. These are very, very iconic guitar designs. And they have made their way into the hands of many, many artists and many, many different genres of music, and inspired many, many, many more people on top of that. So I think because of the history behind Gibson and and the 2 body styles, the 2 guitar designs in question, I think Dean has always kind of looked at their use and their take on those designs as, again, inspiration and tribute more than anything else. Which is, number 1, I don't think they've ever stopped making them, and number 2, why they're so upset that Gibson's coming after them now. Again, do I think Gibson has a case? Looking at it objectively, yes. Unfortunately, I do. And I say unfortunately because I think for the iconic guitar companies that I just mentioned, I think they should be willing to take on some responsibility, and look at these other smaller companies that are being inspired and trying to pay tribute to Gibson's designs. Quite honestly, I think Gibson is Gibson bullying the rest of the guitar community, and a lot of other people seem to agree with that as well, because the reason being that if Fender went after every single guitar company that ever made a Strat body style, which by the way, Gibson are not innocent in that either. They have in fact made several Strat style guitars over the course of their history. But if Fender went after everybody, number one, they would have just about all the resources tied up in lawsuits at this point. And number two, they would be taking away a lot of really, really, really great designs that were obviously inspired by the Strat and or the Tele, and have gone on to become their own thing. Take the Ibanez RG, for example. I think, the last time I read this statistic, the best-selling guitar in the world to date is still, in fact, the Fender Strat, and that encompasses all the different models of the Fender Strat, not just one specific, but every single Fender Strat in Fender's catalog. If you encompass all the Strats into one category, that category is the number one selling guitar in the world. Number two, right behind it, has in fact become the Ibanez RG. And the Ibanez RG, while you could certainly see the similarities between the two and see where one was inspired by the other, the RG has gone on to become an entirely different thing that's geared towards an entirely different subset of guitar players. And really, the same can be said for the Dean Z and the Dean V. Yes, a lot of rock and metal players still prefer the Gibson Explorer and the Gibson Flying V, but I think the more the modern rock and metal players, there's a core group of those customers that really, really like the Dean models. And Gibson's not going to be able to reach those people because Gibsons are priced so much more expensively. Yes, I understand that's why the Epiphones are there, but to a metal player, and I grew up one, and I am still one today, so I can say this. The look of a headstock is can make all the difference in the world of a guitar player's perception of that guitar. And the Dean guitars, particularly the split V headstock, just seems to cater a lot to hard rock and metal players, because it's such it's a very aggressive looking headstock, and that's what they like. So let's talk a minute about the video that Gibson released on this, and I've forgotten the guy's name, so I got it pulled up here in front of me, and it the video itself was called Play Authentic. That was the title of the video. And the in the video itself was the newly hired director of brand experience by the name of Mark Agnesi, and I think I'm pronouncing that right. He is a newly hired executive for Gibson, and director of brand experience. In other words, chief branding officer, if I had to guess. Sounds like a different spin on the title of Chief Branding Officer. And the article that I just glanced over very quickly, by the way, did mention that the video has been subsequently taken down. I did get a chance to see it before that happened. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, it was not the most tactful thing in the world. And I think it left pretty much the entire guitar world asking, why would Gibson even put this up? And then again, as I mentioned, the next day, which was followed by the announcement of a lawsuit against Dean Guitars. So, the two are obviously related. Not the most tactful way to approach the situation, I don't think. Certainly not in my opinion. And some of the phrasing, and I'm sure you can search it and find the things that were said in the video. But he referenced not wanting to bully other guitar companies specifically. I don't remember the quote exactly word for word, but it was something to that extent, which and then followed up with something that obviously completely contradicted it. Now, here is why I was surprised to see this particular video. Last year, Gibson hired a brand new CEO from the outside by the name of James Curley, who goes by JC for short, I believe. So JC Curley. And all of the interviews and everything that I read on the guy, seemed really, really positive. He was the former CEO of the Levi Jeans Company. He's a guitar player himself, has had a love for Gibson guitars for a long time, by all, a lot of success, on his resume in the business world, by all accounts, he seemed like he was, it seems like he's absolutely the right guy to lead Gibson back from the depths, if you will. Because we all know their recent history and financial situation and, what they managed to get themselves into at this point. And I've commented on that in the past. So, when they brought in JC, I was really, and I still am, really excited because I still think that he is absolutely the right guy for the job. He made an appearance at Winter NAMM. He's addressed all of people's primary concerns, which were, very poor quality control and, ever increasingly ever increasing prices, to the point that they were just, Gibson guitars are just way too expensive and so far out of reach for so many people. He addressed all those, all of those different things publicly, like I said, both at giant forums, in front of lots of people, like Winter NAMM. He's made appearances on several YouTube channels, and both big and small, and done interviews with those people. I've read about some other people in the industry. They've gotten a chance to speak with them directly. They knew where they were. They knew where they were at. Most importantly, they were. They were willing to talk about and, own up to all the problems and more specifically what they needed to do to fix them. And in their defense, what I have seen thus far, you remember the 2019 line of Gibson guitars that were announced at around Summer NAMM last year, and that was their previous business model. They would announce the upcoming model year's guitars at Summer NAMM, release them in about, they'd be shipping and available for sale to the public in about October-ish, and that is the product line up until the following year at Summer NAMM, when all those models are discontinued and the next year's model line is announced. Well, one thing that the guitar community was getting really tired of keeping up with was all the different changes from one year to the next. And, all this feature is now gone. This feature is now in its place. They're changing the serial number system around this year. So now in order to decode that, you have to know exactly what system was in place for which year. And, and most importantly, the prices just kept going up and up and up and up. And, it was over $3,000 for a Les Paul Standard. That's a lot of people thought that not only is that a lot of money, but that's too much money. Well, the 2019 line of guitars have already been discontinued, and they have been replaced with, for example, the 2019 Gibson Les Paul Standard has been discontinued. You know what replaced it? The Gibson Les Paul Standard. And it comes with both a 50s neck and a 60s neck, a variety of a few different colors, or finishes, if you will, and each, with each neck variety, it's just a good old-fashioned Les Paul Standard, which is what we have wanted. So, keeping all that in mind, everything that I have seen from JC, again, seems like he is absolutely the right guy for the job. So when they went and released this video with Mark Agnesi, the new chief branding officer that is lighting up the rest of the guitar world and, basically, making threats and, what has since become known, as the bully video, the bully guitar video. It was a shock and a disappointment, because I think just about every other guitar company in the world have been, big and small, have been rooting for Gibson, to rebuild and come back to greatness that we all know that they could be, and really what they're supposed to be. So, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. I don't know what conversations have been had. I don't know. I don't know. I am going to assume that somebody, there's obviously a backlash of some kind because the video has been taken down. However, given everything that we, the guitar community, know about one James J.C. Curley, hopefully, he will make an appearance in front of the media and address all of the, this particular situation. And to be quite honest with you, I think he should, because I think Gibson have been, after being on a downslide for a number of years now, I think their trajectory has shot back up at a pretty steep angle. I've been really excited about the direction that they've been going, and if you followed my channel for a while, I have not been shy of being critical of Gibson. Yes, I make fun of the reverse flying V every now and then, quite frankly, because I think it's hilarious. But Gibson Guitar Company as a company and their product, I still own all my Gibsons. I've always been a Gibson guy. However, I also own Dean guitars. I'm also a Dean guy, and what is essentially becoming a giant pissing contest. It's sad to see, and it also makes me wonder what we have not been told, because the only reason I can think of why they would wait, after 40 years, they would decide to file a lawsuit against Dean guitars. And again, from a legal standpoint, they got a beef. Not going to deny it. They got a beef. If you think they don't, look at the guitars. They have a beef. But waiting 40 years to drop the hammer, come on, that's a little excessive. That means you need money. Yeah, that's desperate. That's desperation is what that is. And that is what concerns me the most. Because if it's Dean today, who's it going to be tomorrow? And if you're the guy that's the center of the community, the focal point, you're the biggest guitar company there is. At least you were. This time last year you were anyway. And you're doing all the right things. You're getting back to basics with building your with building your guitars. The other brands that you've acquired over the years, you're taking those seriously and relaunching them with the dignity that they deserve. Brands like Kramer and Steinberger. I've even heard rumors that they're going to do something with Cakewalk again. I know the studio guys are going to go nuts about that if that happens. You're the nucleus, and everybody else looks to you. If you're in the center and you start shooting down everybody that's around you and turn them all against you, eventually that nucleus, there's a lot more of them than there are you. And eventually it will close in. And that nucleus will become very, very small. And the Gibson that we once knew, and the Gibson that we're all hoping to come back, that we get to see again at the top of the mountain, that Gibson, we may not see it. We may never see it again. In conclusion, as I've mentioned several times throughout this video, do I think the Gibson have a case in filing this lawsuit against Dean guitars? Yes, I do. From a legal standpoint, they absolutely do. From a moral standpoint, I think they have a bigger responsibility to not just the guitar community, but the entire music community, to lead the pack and be the company that everybody else looks up to, not the company that is making enemies out of all the little guys. So, for those of you that asked me for my opinion, this video went on a lot longer than I thought it was going to, but there's my opinion. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for both of these companies. I'm hoping this whole thing works out amicably. And quite honestly, I hope it turns into nothing. If you're asking me whose corner I'm in my own neutral corner as the customer. I'm as the customer and the guy who sells these things for a living. So, that is my neutral corner, and it is really in everybody's interest if this whole thing works out and, turns to nothing. In other words, if we could all just get along. Please subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts on this. I will post any links that I can find. If I can still find, maybe somebody else posted that video, I'll post that down in the description so you can check it out. Again, if it's still out there. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for listening. I will see you in the next video.